Hello, this is Brooks Whittington with halfwheel.com. Today we're taking a look at the Judge, a V-cutter from JetLine that was introduced last October. Now, when they announced this V-cutter, it actually filled a pretty big hole in the company's lineup, as they haven't really introduced that many V-cutters in the past. They announced it in two different colors to start, black and red as you see here, and a kind of a black and psychedelic copper color. Both of them are exact same cutter. Both of them cost the exact same price, $59.99, and both of them come with a spiffy pouch here, carrying pouch, that's made of a nice velvet material. Now, as I mentioned, the JetLine The Judge is a V-cutter, but it uses something called the reverse V-cut method, which is where the sides of the V blade, as you see here, the inverted V blade, are the first to touch the cigar on the outside areas as opposed to the tip here. And the middle of the cap is the final part to come in contact with the blade. Now, this process is designed to result in cleaner cuts with less overall damage to the cap and the wrapper. There are cutters that use the other, a normal V cut, like this one here that you see on the screen. And, it's just a different type of cut, and different manufacturers use different versions. Now, the blades on the Judge are made entirely of stainless steel, and the body is made of metal as well, although there are the rubber parts on the top, on the back and the front that are not metal. The cutter weighs 4 ounces. It measures 1.77 inches wide and 0.55 inches thick, with a total height of 2.9 inches when it's closed and 4 inches when it's fully open, like so. It also comes with a lifetime warranty. All right, with all that out of the way, I guess it's time to cut some cigars and show you how the cutter works physically. Now, the process is very simple, and you can see as I point out and cut a cigar here, you can see that it's a very, very quick process, and you can get a cigar cut that looks like this. And basically, you are going to pick up the cigar cutter, and you are going to make sure that you pick it up and push both buttons here on the side, both triggers. Now, the blade only activates if you push both buttons at the same time, and always on the top for the most part. And it pops up on a spring-loaded trigger very, very nicely. One of the cool things about this cutter is the fact that it does have these indentions here on the top and the bottom for your thumb and your middle finger. And basically that gives you quite a bit more control when you're talking about cutting these larger ring gauge cigars. Now, as I mentioned, you can cut 70 ring gauges pretty easily. This is a 70 ring gauge cigar here. And you take the cutter and you put the cigar into the cap of the cigar into the opening, as you see here. And you basically push down to make sure that it's firmly inside of the opening. And then you push the lever closed and cut through. You want to make sure you do it firmly, and you get a cut like that. As you can see, it's fairly shallow on these larger ring gauge cigars. They tend to be 80, for example. 80 ring gauge cigar is even more shallow than that. But you can do something called an X cut with a V-cut cutter, which is basically when you turn the cigar after cutting it once. You turn the cigar and cut it the other way, so that you have the cut that goes like this, and there we go. It gives you a nice X cut there. I would try it the first way with just one cut, and then if the draw is a little bit too tight, you try it this way, and it will work out like a charm typically. All right, so now I think it's time to give you some nice rundown on good things and bad things I found out about this cutter as I was using it for about 2 months. One of the really great things about this cutter is the textured finger rests. Your middle finger and thumb go here, and they really does help when you're talking about balance and actually pushing through the cap of the cigar. It's really awesome, and I really wish that more manufacturers incorporated something like this, because it works like a charm. Very well designed. This is a very, very well balanced and well made cutter. It's built to last. It's very solid. I have no problems with the mechanism or how it works in terms of, over and over again opening this thing and closing it. It's very, very smooth and solid, no doubt about it. There is some issues with extended use when you're talking about a little bit of damage, as you can see, wear and tear on the rubber there and around the edges. But that's to be expected when you're talking about keeping it in your pocket and bouncing it around quite a bit. It's also very, very well suited for larger ring gauge cigars. It was presumably built, as they mentioned, to handle large ring gauge cigars, and 70 ring gauge is not a problem. As you could see, we had no problem cutting that cigar there. And the only thing you have to think about with an 80 ring gauge, something larger than a 70, is the fact that you really have to be careful about how deep that cut is. You can only get it so far in there, and it's going to be a little bit more of a shallow cut on an 80 ring gauge. So you have to be aware of that and work around it. With this X cut would be a good point if it's necessary to actually have a little bit more of a draw after cutting it once with the shallow of the 80, shallow cut of the 80. Then maybe an X cut would be the way to go with that. Now, one of the other great things is the fact that this is, I don't know if it was built like this specifically, but I found it to be a very nice safety feature that these blades only open up with, by pushing both of these buttons, triggers on the sides at once. You can't do it when you're just doing one. That won't activate it. It has to be two. It's very nice when you're carrying around in your pocket. You don't have to worry about it. A lot of the cutters that have the knob on the front, a lot of times they'll open up like in my pocket just randomly. This has never done that, and it's a really nice safety feature that I think goes a long way in terms of making me feel more comfortable about carrying it around in my pocket. All right, and after the good things, we have some bad things, starting with the actual cuts. Now, while the vast majority of the cuts that I got from this cutter were clean and straight, I had more issues than I expected in about 1 out of every 5 cigars, ranging from relatively minor problems like small pieces of tobacco. As you can see here, there are little pieces hanging on there, and the cut looks a little jagged. But also things like larger issues like cracked caps and things of that nature. As you can see here in this one, there's a cracked cap right there. And it's a small cracked cap. It's not a big deal, and probably wouldn't be that big of an issue. But it happened more than I expected, and more than in other V cutters that performed almost flawlessly, like the Colibri SV cut, for example, which is a great example of a V cutter done very well, which also happens to have the advantage of having a straight cut on the other side. The other issues that I had with the cutter are fairly minor. Things like the fact that at 4 ounces, it's very, very heavy. You're not going to forget that it's in your pocket anytime soon. And it gets kind of a chore. It gets to become kind of a chore to carry it around with a lighter and things of that nature at the same time. Color options, you only have 2 color options with this cutter. It's not a big deal in terms of, I'm sure they'll introduce more at some point. But it was kind of annoying that I had only 2 options to choose from. And in terms of the actual motion, the cutting motion, you have to push down on this thing quite a bit to get it to go down. And it becomes a little laborious sometimes, especially with larger ring gauge cigars. It's smooth, but it's definitely not a easy process in terms of pushing it down. It takes some doing to get it down through there. And finally, the cuts on this, using this cutter, the cuts on smaller ring gauge cigars can be a little bit deep. You have to really be careful about that kind of thing when you're using this on smaller ring gauge cigars like Coronas or Lanceros. if you push the cap all the way into the actual opening, like you would with a larger ring gauge cigar, you're going to get a really deep cut. And so you have to pull it out just a little bit. It takes a little getting used to. It's not a difficult process, but it's definitely something you have to think about when you're actually cutting those smaller ring gauge cigars. And so after all that, in the end, can I recommend the JetLine, the Judge V Cutter? The answer, unfortunately, is no. Look, I love this design. I love the build quality of this cutter. I love the fact that you have these finger rests that really give you a lot of control over how much you push, the cap, the blade through the cap, how much balance you have. And I love the fact that you can only open it with by pushing these two triggers at the same time. However, having said that, the problems come down to cuts. 20% of the cigars that I cut with this cutter had some issues. Most of them were relatively minor, but some of them were not. And you're going to pay $60 for this cutter. You could pay the same $60 or a little bit more and get a much better product, something like the Colibri V cut, the Colibri SV cut, or even the XIKAR VX V cutter, all of which will give you much more clean and consistently clean cuts for your cigars. So that's my review. If you would like any more news or reviews on cigars, go to halfwheel.com.